Yeah. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Laura. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Laura.
It is my honor this morning to introduce my dear friend Annie, today's speaker. She's a beautiful soul, and she is a living, breathing example of the promises if they were to hop off the pages of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're walking around in everyday life. Annie here is she's living them. Um, She is, I mean, her journey in recovery is built on a foundation of hard work and commitment to this program. Um, she shows up when she says she's going to do something, she does it. And she's an inspiration. She's been an inspiration for me in this program, and I imagine many others in here as well. She walks the walk and she talks the talk. She sponsors women in the program. She works regularly with her sponsor. She is devoted to service work, and her recovery shows all of that and more. I think everyone can agree with that. And what I admire most about Annie, I think, is her honesty and her unwavering commitment to this program. She she's very candid in her care, and she has said things to me that I needed to hear, maybe didn't want to hear and needed to hear. And I value that gift more than anything. Um, she, I think our first conversation was on the phone many years ago. A mutual friend of ours had put us on the phone together. It was like, you two need to meet. That was kind of like a little date of sorts. And ever since then we have gone on countless adventures. She is always up for an adventure, and you got to be careful because she'll rope you into doing things like volleyball. I mean, no, I'm just kidding. Um, she's fearless. She really is, and it's just being in her orbit is such a blessing in my life, and I can't believe our paths have crossed. I couldn't be more grateful for that. One of the things she says a lot, she may say today, is anything we put in front of our recovery, we lose. And she walks that truth every day. So without further ado, Annie.
This is really nerve-wracking. Hi, I'm Annie. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 21st, 2000 and what? 13. I celebrated 11 years this last December, and it's easier to stay sober than to get sober. Congratulations on the birthday, people. I really enjoyed hearing you speak, Rob. What is your name? What is your name? Rob. Bill. Shit. I can remember details about people that I can't remember names that well. I've enjoyed hearing you speak a couple of weeks, maybe a month ago. And you miss, she plays volleyball like an alcoholic. She's scrappy and tenacious, and she's all business. So you can tell like who the alcoholics are at pickup volleyball. They play ball like I like to play ball, which is scrappy and tenacious and not giving up. And that's how I drank, right? And that's how I recovered too. So I have a home group. It's the High Noon group. We meet at the Methodist Church Monday through Saturday, and surprise, it's at noon. I have a sponsor who's here today. I meet with her every week. We work the steps, we read the literature, we chat about how alcoholism is a continued disease even after we put down the drink. And my sponsor has a sponsor, and I do what's suggested in the program because there's that statement, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our plan. And I believe that because I see people in the rooms recover from this disease. And I love a speaker meeting because I love the whole story. So I think after a bit, we pretty up and clean up pretty well. But no one ends up in this room if their life wasn't shit from alcoholism, right? And I didn't have a lot of the yes because I was holding on like with spider web strings to these things, external things. But I tell you what, I lost my soul to alcoholism. And I imagine if you're sitting in this room today, you did too. So I don't think anyone needs a DUI or to lose their kids or their job or blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure we all lost our soul and we're a slave to this disease. And that's enough for me to qualify, I've been kind of stuck on, I love the literature in AA. And in case you don't know, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, this is the truest love affair of my life. I'm in love with this program. And I was thinking today, no matter what's going on in my life, if I come to a meeting or talk to a person in the program or read the literature, I feel safe. It changes the way I feel. you know, a meeting does for me what 5 shots of vodka did for me, you know, so this is an adequate substitute for me for drinking. But one of the pieces of literature, I love the daily reflections, and I've been kind of stuck on this February 26th reading. And another thing that happens when you're in AA and you get older, is you might need reading glasses because you make it to 48 because you haven't died of liver disease. But oh, I can read it. Well, I think those are too much. I'm still. Give me a chance. So on February 26th, it says no ordinary success story. And it says AA is no success story in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a story of suffering transmuted under grace into spiritual progress. And then the reading below says, upon entering AA, I listened to others talk about the reality of their drinking, loneliness, terror, and pain. As I listened further, I soon heard a description of a very different kind, the reality of sobriety. It is a reality of freedom and happiness, of purpose and direction, and of serenity and peace with God, ourselves, and others. By attending meetings, I am reintroduced to that reality over and over. I see it in the eyes and hear it in the voices of those around me. By working the program, I find the direction and strength with which to make it mine. The joy of AA is that this new reality is available to me. So that's all I got, bud. Last week I told Dave when he asked me if I was speaking that I was going to talk about my resentment for him for 45 minutes. But then I figured everyone else in this room had one on and two, so that would be boring. So I needed new material. Actually, I know Dave and his household because his wife is my sponsor, and they just really live the program. And that's such a good example to me. Like, this needs to be my foundation in my life. And I see people who have 30 plus years, you know, living the program, going to meetings, sponsoring people, doing service work. You know, I always say this is like being a Mormon, but you don't have to wear the sacred undergarments. And it's the good things about it, you know, like it's like being a Mormon without the negative things. And I was raised in the Mormon church for the first 10 years of my life with my grandfather. And then after that, my mom put a halt on it and they had to go to the United Methodist Church. So I feel like I've always been kind of a seeker of a power greater than myself, but I never found it till I came to the spiritual program. So I don't know what it was like. Hmm. It's boring, right? It just sucked. But anyway, here, this is what it was like. So I grew up in Shoto, Montana, um, which creates a lot of women with grit, you know, and there's a lot of drinking and everything. And I grew up with a single mom and my grandparents. And my grandparents were retired by the time my mom had me, and my sisters. So they were our primary caregivers. And my grandpa wasn't a good dad to my mom, but he was a hell of a grandpa. And my ex-husband will always say that the reason you're such a spoiled brat is because of your grandfather. So I had a life that was a big dichotomy. My grandparents loved and adored us. And my mom had has type 1 bipolar, and it was untreated. So I grew up, you know, like with this profound love and being pretty spoiled. Like, I knew my grandma would always go to the grocery store on lunchtime to get my sister and I our favorite candy bars. And I spent a ton of time with my grandpa and grew up a tomboy in a dress. And then my mom, you know, all she could do was work and come home and go to bed. And my mom did a lot of things wrong, but she also did a lot of things right. Like, she had the same job for 37 years and she worked for the state, and she set the foundation for me for being of service to others through a career, because she did all the disability food stamps welfare for the county. And, you know, she showed me what it was like to have a consistent job and to find joy in helping others. And I've been a nurse for a long time, and I work at St. Pat's, and I just had 27 years of working there last year. And I love nursing to the point that my older daughter became a nurse, so I didn't taint it for her. And we worked together. And So I just grew up, kind of in some confusion. And then my grandparents later exited my life, and my mom married, like they were put on the outside because my mom married a very abusive alcoholic when I was like 10 or 11. And there was a lot of like physical abuse and verbal abuse in the household. And before that, there was like no yelling or screaming or real dysfunction. My mom never drank. She just was, negligent and absent. And during that kind of fundamental period of time, like neglect wise, like one time she dropped my sister and I off at Girl Scout camp, and we were only supposed to be there for a week, and she didn't come back and pick us up, right? Like for another week. So I kind of learned that you can't trust the people who should be taking care of you. And my dad died when I was 11 months old. And I was always told, because I also grew up in a culture of secrecies and silence and guilt and shame as currencies, not unconditional love. And I was always told my dad died in a not drunk driving accident, just in a driving accident. And then it came out that my sister and I were half sisters. I had a different father, and he had died by suicide. He was an addict and alcoholic, and he was a seismograph. And they worked, my mom would travel with him, and he'd beat the shit out of my mom, and he died by killing himself. He shot himself in my grandma's front lawn in Red Lodge. So, like, once again, it was just this atmosphere of like, you don't trust people because they don't even tell you the truth. And now I realize, like, today, my mom was doing the best she could with the skills she had, but I don't have a relationship with her because she's very toxic. And, I just can't have those things in my life. And through doing a lot of work in the program, I always think you get the things you want, they just don't come in the packages that you think they're going to come in. So I've had motherly love because of women's, especially sponsorship in the program, that have really like fit that puzzle piece into my life. So I started drinking when I was like 16. So I wanted to be a really good girl, right? Like I played sports. I was remember that DARE program? How many people were in that? That are like my age, right? And like going to the Helena Capitol for the DARE program. And then just one day it really hit me like no one gives a fuck. Like my family, like no one cares if I'm a good girl, and I had good grades. I played volleyball through school. I was in every activity you could be in. I was in 4-H, I was in Girl Scouts, I was on volleyball, pep band, choir, and even the BB gun team. But then it just really hit me like no one gives a shit. Because by then my grandparents had been pushed out of the picture. They were living back at my grandpa's homestead about 15 miles out of town. And my grandma was very mentally ill. She had schizoaffective disorder and spent a lot of her adult life when my mom was young in Warm Springs, getting electroconvulsive therapy. And my grandpa just had his hands full, like trying to manage everything. So, I just thought no one gives a shit. And my mom, she just wasn't available. So I started drinking, and I found a girl who drank like I drank, which is in Harmon, Shoto, Montana. And we'd always get like a fifth of Black Velvet for the weekend. And you have to hustle, right, to get booze at that time in a town that size. And I had 2 jobs. I worked in a nursing home and a retirement home, so I had money. I had a 1972 Camaro with an 8-track, because it only cost $500. And so like every weekend we'd get wasted. And yeah, there was a very weird culture where there were older men who were willing to party with young women, in this town of 900 people. And I got an MIP one time, and I just drank alcoholically, and I just felt like I probably would have stayed on that course, except for the teenage pregnancy, which probably saved my life. So I had a high school boyfriend, and I got pregnant on accident. And my son is 30, my oldest son. And I moved to Missoula to live with my ex-husband's sister. We weren't married at the time. And I went to night school and finished high school. And I had this little baby boy. And I think my ex-husband in that family was like, I was talking to my friend Kelsey about this with alcoholism. So like I was always a problem drinker, but it was like having a bungee cord, right? When I had a husband and a family and a job, like I would really start to propel off the cliff, but the bungee cord would catch me with my drinking, right, and pull me back in. So I could go periods of time without drinking, and I could control my drinking just because I had that bungee cord. And then I blew up my marriage intentionally. I wanted to, after 17 years, we had 3 children, have 3 children. And I wanted to party and I didn't want to have like be tied down with all these responsibilities. And so when I left my husband, and he's a good guy, like we had a house, we had 3 dogs, we had cats, we traveled. He was a good breadwinner, like we had a good life, but I didn't want that. I was restless, irritable, and discontent, and I had no idea I was an alcoholic. But when I left my husband, it was like the bungee cord was cut. And then it was just like free falling alcoholism. And I remember as when I left my husband, I thought not about him or my children. And this happened very abruptly. But I thought now I can drink the way I want to drink. And I want to be blacked out or passed out. I don't want to be at the bar, right? Like I just want to be off this planet. So I quickly started drinking a fifth of Pendleton a day. Within 18 months, I was drinking, like, I'd have to go on the weekends to the liquor store and get like a fifth of Pendleton and a fifth of ginger vodka. And I wasn't fucking around. And I drank like that for like 18 months. And then I wanted to stop drinking, but I didn't know I was an alcoholic. And I didn't know what AA was. And I couldn't stop drinking. And I, at that time, had a pretty cordial relationship with my ex-husband because he would say, I just thought you'd always come back. Now we've moved past that, but it's been many years. And I didn't go back. But I did end up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I wanted to stop drinking, and I was having such bad withdrawal symptoms. And he came over to take care of our son, and he's like, "You know what you need? A drink." And I also was taking 12 milligrams of clonazepam a day, which anyone knows what doses those are. And I'd call my ex-husband at nighttime and I'd be like, come pick up the kids. I'm going to die. And he's like, just go to sleep, honey. And it's crazy. I would wake up over and over again. So the day I wanted to stop drinking wasn't my last drink, but it was the beginning of a 5-month journey to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went to the ER community and I just told them I thought I was having benzo withdrawal. And I had to stay there for some time. And then I'm like, you didn't ask me those questions about do you feel safe? And they're like, well, do you? Because I think like I put on a okay presentation, right? I'm a nurse. I have my shit together. I was running, swimming, biking, like it was all a facade. And I said, no, I don't. I feel like I'm going to kill myself. And then they're like, well, maybe you should go to the mental, like they gave me these options, right? Like maybe you should go to a psych unit or be admitted for benzo withdrawal. And I'm like, no, the world cannot go on without me. Like I was so oblivious, right? And so they gave me like 10 milligrams of IM Valium, and they called my ex-husband and he had to come pick me up. And that was the beginning of like getting into an addiction treatment counselor through my nurse practitioner. She asked me if I wanted to go to rehab. I said no. The world can't go on. And in 5 months in an addiction treatment counselor, she kept saying, give me 10 reasons you can't drink. And I'd say, because it's expensive, and things like that. But like the reality is I can't safely drink because I'm an alcoholic. And I was in this really odd relationship. I was engaged to a man I didn't want to marry, but I didn't think I could find a way out. but I did. And but he was supportive. He knew people in NA, and so he planted a seed for me. And finally, I was so desperate. The relationship ended. I really didn't have anything. Like I was coming off benzos on a taper. I was still drinking on Antabuse they gave me, and I couldn't stop, right? And this therapist who was like 80 years old said, she had a white dog, a real dog, and she'd sit in her rocking chair with her bun. And her mom was an alcoholic and she was an Al Anon. And she said one day, she's like, why don't you just call this number for this woman in Alcoholics Anonymous? And I'm like, fine, I'll do it when I get to my car. And she's like, well, honey, there's a phone right by you. And she had a landline because she's 80. And I'm like, oh no. And she's like, yeah, you should do it. And I was desperate and willing. And that hit me at the right point. And I called it, and this woman called me back and she told me what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And then I said, well, that's not enough information. We need to meet. So we met and talked about AA. And then I went to my first meeting, and it was the women's group. And I heard things in there that made me realize I was an alcoholic. Like, do you know what's going to happen when you start to drink? And no, I don't. There's like a plethora of things. But what I know is I can't stop drinking when I start. And if I do stop, I can't stay stopped for long. And that's a good enough definition of alcoholism for me. So I haven't had a drink since my first meeting. And, they just kept saying, get a sponsor and find someone who has what you want. Of course, I didn't say it was my first meeting. And there was a woman in there who just kept coming up to me and being like, do you have a sponsor? And I'm like, well, okay. Then I asked her, will you be my sponsor? And it felt awful. Like I was asking someone to marry me, and I was probably afraid of the rejection. And she had what I wanted, right? She was a retired nurse. She had nice hair. She had great makeup. And she had like all the accessories and jewelry and clothes. So I could tell her life was put together. And she was working a solid program of recovery, which I didn't really know. I just saw physically that she had her shit together. And so she's like, okay, I'll sponsor you. You need to get the 12 and 12. There's a little red book and spiral notebook. And we meet at the Providence Center and we do step work every week. And since the second week in recovery, I have worked that type of program. And I worked with the same sponsor for 8 years. And when she was moving from town, I knew I needed a sponsor. And I had heard Linda talk about some things at a meeting, and I didn't really know her. But I could identify what she was talking about, and she seemed serene. And Linda and Dave, I had a friend named Howie who committed suicide in the program because he couldn't get it. And I knew that Linda and Dave had been so good to him. And I'm like, these people must be good people. So Linda's like, well, what do you have in mind? I think I cold texted her because I'm not even good at like cold calling. And I said, well, I want to meet with someone weekly, do the steps, like real sponsorship, just not a sponsor in theory. And so then we started to work together. And I think that was 3 years ago. And pretty much we meet every week on Thursday at the same time. And we're reading the stories in the back of the big book that we did the steps. And I'm also doing the steps again through the NA workbook. And that's incredible. If you want to write essays, like 75 of them on the first step, look at that book. And I'm doing it with the women I sponsor because they love 3-ring binders, both of them. And they're very organized. And I'm not, but they, I want to do I want to engage with people, I want to engage with people and help people find this program and fall in love with this program and realize like, this is the cool club. These are all the people you always wanted to hang out with. Like alcoholics, unless you have wet brain, are the most amazing people I know. So I'm doing the steps with them. And like I said, it involves a 3-ring binder and a lot of essays. So I think that's probably my 5th time through the steps. But I guess what I'll talk about So that's what it was like though. Is, just the 12 steps in my experience with them. I already told you like about my powerlessness over alcohol. And then my first sponsor made me write an inventory of my first step and my drinking. And so I had it on pen and paper, right? And I could see how powerless I was, but also how unmanageable my life is. Because all I could do was not really take care of my kids. I could drink, I could barely go to work, and I could run a shit ton of miles, and I could swim a boatload. And I thought I had a nice tan, but it was actually jaundice because my liver functions were elevated. So now today my life looks so different, right? And that unmanageability, like I told you, I had no idea what Alcoholics Anonymous was. Never knew anyone in it. In nursing school, didn't have to go to any of the meetings like they do now for education. So the first step, just writing an inventory, was super important to me. I will also mention in sobriety, I have been through a boatload of things and not drank. So when I was 5 months sober, I had a collapsed lung, and it kept happening over and over and over again. And I spent 20 days in the hospital over a 3-month period. And women would bring meetings into me. And then I had a friend who liked the women's, who wasn't in the program, but loves the Bible. And she'd bring that into me and read to me. And I was so afraid after my third hospitalization that I was going to drink again. And I was in therapy with that same therapist. And she said, well, you've never been to treatment. And that's how willing I am, right? So, and Laura also knew a treatment program I could go to. So I spent 10 days in treatment, at 5, maybe 6 months, 7 months sober. And I didn't drink. I needed a safe place to be because I didn't at that time have really a relationship with any of my family, So I needed a safe place to be, and that was safe. Because to be honest with you, sometimes even now, the scariest place to be is with myself. Like I have always had, to be honest, suicidal ideations. And I think, if you have a parent who committed suicide, you have a much higher probability. It's like choose your own ending books, and there's all these chapters. And for me, that's one of the chapters that could be possible. So I don't feel like that when I'm working the program and I'm going to meetings. Or now I even notice if I read the literature, I feel calm and safe. And I also started going to the 8 a.m. Zoom Sunrise meeting, which is solid if you have not been to it. There's like 6 people on there with 40 plus years who are on there every day, and it's all solution oriented. So I guess for me, yeah, that first step was huge because that just offered me the door into Alcoholics Anonymous. And that key back there that people have probably seen, that key of willingness. So I had the desperation and willingness, and I was asking Alex, the gal, I'm like, that key? She's like, yeah, I got it at a yard sale. And I had always thought it was like this spectacular sculpture. Or like I was thrift shopping and I found it. And I'm like, oh, so precious. So you too could find a key of willingness in the program or at a thrift shop. And then 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I think this is a bridge step for me between 1 and 2. 1 and 3. So 2 for me means I can come into the rooms, I can hear your stories of what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, and you are restored to sanity in regard to drinking. Like we still all have issues. I came for my drinking problem and I stay for my thinking problem. And if I don't deal with my thinking problem, I'm going to have a drinking problem again. It's like this infinite thing that can happen. But that to me was more about what was going on with other people. And that gave me hope because I didn't have any hope in myself. But I had hope in this program, and I see it works for others. So that's really important for me to go to meetings and also just stay connected with the fellowship. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. Wouldn't it be awful if someone just yeah, that would be bad. Yeah, or good. And that to me, is a big deal because I have turned my alcoholism over to the program. And at first, God to me was a group of drunks, an acronym. It was the program itself, and it's changed. But when I'm not feeling steady, I always go to group of drunks, in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Well, that was a doozy. And luckily with my first sponsor, right, because I had 37 years of backed up crap that I had never talked about. My first sponsor would have me work on it for the week, and then we'd meet weekly and we'd do a 5th step. Then I'd work on it more, then we did a 5th step. And I am telling you people what, I worked really hard, and I bet I had like 4 notebooks on step 4. And it took months and months and months, but guilt and shame would have kept me drunk. I have to do the steps. And there were things I thought I would never tell anyone, right? And in this NA workbook, on the 4th step, one of them is abuse to others and to yourself. And, the biggest part of the 4th for me was like, what's my part in it? And sometimes I had no part in it. I was just a child getting stripped half naked and beat with a fucking belt by an alcoholic, with a mom who did nothing. And that was really good for me. Like those were things I was never going to tell anyone, right? And also the bad ways I parented my children when I was drinking, I was never going to tell anyone those. And I told my sponsor those, and the guilt and shame lifted. And maybe that's when the obsession to drink cooled its jets. So just the 5th step, like I did it. Here's one thing about me that my parents know, like when the tenacity of my alcoholism can be so positive, like I can get stuck on something good and I can really go to town. And for me, that 4th and 5th step, I feel like I did a super thorough job the first time through. And it's great. It gets less and less every time. Now I only have 4 resentments, and 3 of them are because the people are just pests. That's really different, they're exes. And fathers of my children. So I had a daughter in recovery who's sick. And, I don't live with her father. So it's been a lot of navigating that relationship. And he's sober, but he doesn't work a program. So it was really hard the first 3 years, but we're making progress. Primarily because I've learned to keep my mouth shut, which takes a lot of work for someone like me. And then 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all the defects of character and humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. On 7, I thought that was like a magic wand. And I wasn't understanding why it wasn't working. And I listened to a boatload of speaker tapes in my car because I'm driving my daughter to ballet, tap, or gymnastics, or swim team, or volleyball, or basketball, because I have the money, because I work hard and I'm sober, to put her in all these activities. And I find joy in being able to be that type of parent. And I thought those were magic, like, why isn't this working for me? But the speaker said, like, right, our defects of character, like we work on good character, and that's how we remove ourselves or distance ourselves. Because that's like one of the definitions of remove in the dictionary is distance yourself from. It doesn't say magically gone. And like I work on good character, and if I work on good character, by golly, those defects of character lay in the corner like an old hound dog, right? But if I'm not spiritually fit, ooh, I'm a difficult person. um, so, that's how I work on those steps. And then like 8 and 9, I had to make a lot of amends. And when I wrote them out, and my sponsor and I would go through them, my first sponsor, and then I sent these letters. And I reestablished a relationship with my aunt. You know, I made amends to my ex-husband. I made amends to my mom and my sister. And my mom and my sister were super befuddled because they didn't think I was an alcoholic. Um, which is, I guess, you know, I did a lot of private drinking. Um, and they didn't like it because I changed. So I used to be the type of woman who was a doormat. And then it swung to like walking over coals that are hot to get into someone's house. And now I feel like I'm the type of woman who is a welcoming mat. But you can only come into my house, you know, like it, I have boundaries today, and I didn't have that. And my mom and my sister didn't like that because the relationship changed, and they're still pretty sick. My sister hasn't drank in 13 years, but that's all related to medical stuff. And she really loved booze, and but she's not in the program. So I had a lot of relief, like with those eighth and ninth. And I tell you what, like with that shame and guilt, like I feel like that promise, you know, we will not regret the past nor wish to change it has came true for me, because without all the things that happen, I wouldn't be the person I am. And because I'm the person I am, I can be of service to others, be a good mom, work the program. And there's so many joys with this program, you know, I wouldn't give it up for anything. Like I wouldn't give it up for a bottle of vodka or 2 bottles or 3 or a whole truckload. But if I take the first drink, I'm going to give it up for this and my life up for the second drink. You know, that's just like the reality. And continue to take personal inventory and admit when we were wrong. I'm really bad at this. I'll admit it. But it's progress, not perfection. I live with another recovering alcoholic who has quite a bit less time in the program than I do. And we've been having a lot of challenges lately. And I feel like two alcoholics living together are like two dump trucks collapse, you know, crashing, right? And then all the trash spills out, and you have to find which is your trash. So like today, I just think if I get in the ring with someone else's alcoholism, with my alcoholism, they're not going to win. Um, and I'm not going to be happy with who I am. So I try to just like stay out of the ring, right? I want to be in recovery. And so I do think the 10 step is challenging for me. When I used to work at Daily, I would do an inventory for a month where I'd pick 2 assets, 2 defects, and I'd give myself a score on how well I did. And one of them was like keeping your mouth shut and minding your own business. So anyways, that's one to work on for me. And prayer and meditation. I hear a friend of mine say prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening to God. Within 2 weeks of getting sober, I started practicing hot yoga, and I practiced at a Bikram studio. And for me, I need active medication, active meditation, like to soothe my nervous system, right? Like I'm always in fight or flight. It's the way I'm wired. And I need an active meditation to soothe it. And then it's like when I'm laying in Savasana, that's when the answers come like, don't send that text. Do you really want to get engaged in this, you know, like snowball effect of your character defects coming out and bickering with this person? So I need that active meditation to hear God. And I always say about, and I still practice yoga probably 6, 7 times a week. And through that, I've met a lot of friends, and it's just been an important part of my life. And then also, I'm a lap swimmer, and also, my favorite swim is like a straight 2000, you know, be alone, because it's like sensory deprivation and all the thoughts go. And because you have to do this breathing pattern, right, with swimming, if you're a swimmer. If you're not, you probably know how hard swimming is. And like that's when my head quiets and I can hear the right answers outside of my false self. And like I know people love to hike in nature. I think even in the 12 and 12, the 11th step talks about active meditation. Because I was at a meeting the other day and they were talking about meditation and they were talking about a lot of people were talking about just sitting and meditating. And I need that active meditation. And I also say about hot yoga is no one knows whether you're sweating or crying. And I cried for the first 3 years of yoga. And no one knew. Um, and then the 12th step is my favorite. Not the part about practicing the principles and all your affairs. So probably as you can tell, I can be a bit of a shit, which I think, working on it, maybe. Maybe. But the 12 step is super important to me. The service work. So I sponsor 2 women, and that has given me so much. Like you might think about drinking, but if you think about shit, I got to meet this person tomorrow. We got to do these steps, like, right? And that's going to take me further away from the drink. And it's just neurochemistry of working with someone. What happens? I mean, it's science. You feel better. You get like a neurochemical bubble bath. That's positive. And one of the gals I sponsor is my coworker. And I always joke and say we have 12-hour AA meetings at work. And that's just been such a great gift in my life. And that's helped me learn to trust people and have like intimate relationships emotionally with women. And for me, I was taught from the get-go, women stick with women and men stick with men in regard to fellowship too. And I think that's important. And I've made good friends that are females in the program. And then like service work. So I told the gal I sponsor, I need you to do some service work. And she got a service gig because I had stopped doing service work for multiple years because my program kind of became convenient, but not like per se the foundation. And she started doing service work. So I'm like, shit, I better get on it. So I got the donut service position again. That was my last service position and got that again. That's the best one ever. I'm never giving it up. And the other exciting thing is a beautiful, wonderful woman with a lot of tenacity named Angela. Has worked 2.5 years maybe on a program to do old school AA, which is to bring the program to alcoholics to the bedside of an alcoholic in the hospital. And she has worked with Providence doing this for 2 years. So they're going to call it AA Hope and Recovery instead of the man on the bed, which was like the third alcoholic, but that some people thought didn't sound good, like administration at Providence, I guess. I don't know. But we're just willing to do whatever. So right now, that program, we're getting fired up to do it. And what we're going to do, we can only have 10 men and 10 female volunteers because Providence has to put us through the volunteer background check, but we have all those people in place. And there will be, it's piloted on one unit. There will be a referral to the social worker on the unit. The social worker will call the phoneless man on this committee, and he will call either women or men, depending on the sex, and match up. We have a whole age range of people, I think from 22 to maybe 80. And a whole age range of sobriety from a month and a half to 37 years. And no, even more. And the alcoholics will come into the bedside of an alcoholic if they agree to it. And we'll just do old school AA, tell them our experience, strength, and hope, and then offer to meet them at a meeting afterwards. And I'm super excited about that. There's only 2 places in the country doing it. Angela said in Florida, there's one at a liver transplant center. And then there's one in a hospital in California. But before treatment centers, this was how AA was done. And I think one alcoholic to another alcoholic is where it's at. I don't know. I'm not poo-pooing treatment centers, but like I can identify with a non-alcoholic, but I sure as hell can identify with another alcoholic. And sometimes I need someone to hold my hand and take me to that first meeting. So that program's coming and I'm super excited about it. And I'll wrap it up because, by saying this is a design for living that really works. The Bible of AA says it, and for me, I use this in all my affairs. I worked on a COVID unit as a nurse for 2.5 years. I didn't take a drink. I got out of a relationship that was unhealthy. I didn't take a drink. I bought a house. I didn't take a drink. I had a collapsed lung. I didn't take a drink. My daughter was super sick with mental health issues. When I came to the program, I didn't take a drink. She's now a nurse that I work with. I didn't take a drink, even when they made me precept her. Like one thinks these are good ideas, right? Until they actually happen. Like it's possible, even if you want to drink, to not take a drink in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have a life beyond my wildest dreams. Last year, I went to meetings in Paris, Puerto Rico. I also went to Mexico to go to meetings there. I'm going to Colombia on Friday for 14 days. Already got meetings. I don't speak Spanish and they're all Spanish speaking. These meetings are the same, but they're different. We're all alcoholics and I can identify with that. And also, this past year, I would say like a big accomplishment was I got really active in the union I work with. And I practice these principles and so much of this program. And we had a shit ton of success with our union. And one of the reasons is because this woman with a 3-ring binder helps so much. And we make the perfect team because she's organized and I'm passionate. And I tell you what, like I never thought I could do these things, right? I couldn't even stop drinking for a half of a day. So that's it. Thanks.